when I was growing up in church, they would be so dismissive of Jesus's actual words. It would be like, well, what Paul says, we have to confess and believe and accept his blood sacrifice by faith in order to be saved. Be careful that you don't get astray by Jesus's teachings. They would literally say things like, that's a good moral standard, but that won't save you.
You're telling me that one of the most evil, corrupted men on earth at that time, he gets this free pass into eternal life when millions of beautiful, righteous, heart-centered people who just wandered into the wrong religion or were born into the wrong religion, they have to go to hell forever because they didn't hear Paul's gospel.
I realized it is a religion of worshiping power. If you have an entity that is demanding worship, demanding power, like I'm God, I know best, don't you dare question me, that is a negatively polarized entity.
All branches of Christianity rob people of their discernment and intuition because they say, look, you're evil, and so you're not trustworthy. You can't rely on your own intuition to know what's right and wrong. Listen to this priest, this bishop, this pastor, and read what they say is in the Bible. I think it's the most powerful, weaponized structure on earth for the negative polarity and has been for millennia now.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of these comments, like you said, they come with a lot of insults like you're evil, false teacher, like whatever unkind name you can come up with. So it begs the question, what kind of religion are you following? And it's not surprising because that is the character of the Christian God.
Shalom Aleichem, peace be with you, my friends, and welcome back to the Jesus Way podcast. So one of our premier topics on this channel, which we focus on, is the concept of salvation, but specifically salvation as Jesus taught it, not as Christianity today teaches it. Because salvation for Yeshua was not just predicated on securing some kind of afterlife position once you die, but as we say, it was the awareness and the embodiment of the kingdom of heaven here on earth, not some kind of escapist gospel about the end times or, some second coming where we're all going to be sucked out of earth and up to heaven. And finally, we leave this horrible realm that God apparently made a huge mistake in sending us to in the first place. Jesus taught no such soteriology. Jesus taught us to bring that kingdom here on earth and to do that primarily through living the golden rule axiom in our lives. That is the gospel of Yeshua and the only way he taught to eternal life here and now. And so without a doubt, I think one of the most important pieces of evidence that corroborates Yeshua's gospel outside of his own teachings is near-death experiences. Now, we've done a number of episodes touching on NDEs, but this is such a wide and broad topic that there's much left to be covered on this subject. And so today we're joined by a guest who I've been good friends with for many years and have done many podcasts with, Melissa Denyce. Melissa Denyce is a spiritual experiencer, a content creator and podcaster, and her highest desire is to create as much love, beauty, and joy on this planet as possible while sharing the way of love itself. And so we're very blessed and excited to be joined by you today, Melissa. Thanks for coming on the podcast to talk about one of our favorite topics together.
Thank you so much for having me. Of course, this is my very favorite topic as well, and I'm just so honored to be here with you two who have such a profound impact on my own spiritual path.
Thank you so much. I mean, your channel, out of all the channels I watch, and I watch a lot of them, I've got to say yours is one of the most aligned. It is incredible, and I'm constantly, check it out. If you haven't seen it, Love Covered Life. It is incredible. They cover everything from near-death experiences to blood sacrifice to Christian origins, salvation, all these topics that we're so dedicated to on this channel. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much.
And Melissa, not only are you our first female guest on the Jesus Way podcast, but I think you are the first person that I've ever been interviewed by who I have then eventually interviewed as well.
Really?
So you've got two big trophies today. Yeah, for sure.
Yes. Amazing.
And I know you share our passion for breaking down the distinctions between the teachings of Paul and Jesus and how those teachings of Paul made things go quite awry after the first century. And this really huge passion and zeal to bring Christianity back to the teachings of Yeshua. So I got my Jesus over Paul shirt on today for this. Felt it was going to be apropos for this episode. And I just want to let you guys know you can get this shirt and many others at our merch section down below on the YouTube channel. But with that being said, I'm going to kick it to you, James, and maybe let's get into some of Melissa's deconstruction journey. What do you think?
Sounds good. Yeah, Melissa, we would just love to know more about your backstory, where you brought up Christian, what was life like growing up, and how have your views evolved over the years?
Absolutely. Feel free to stop me, slow me down, speed me up, whatever. So I'll just start at the beginning. I was raised in Reformed Baptist Christianity, which is very fundamentalist, very strict.
Ooh,
My
yikes.
church held to the 5 points of Calvinism. So let's see if I can remember them. Total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement. There's one I always forget, and then perseverance of the saints. So God predestined ahead of time that 80% of the world's population would go to hell, and he created them for the purpose of burning in hell forever. And Jesus only died for the elect that God chose to go to heaven. And we were also told, like from the pulpit, they would quote the church fathers who came up with this stuff, saying how God would be laughing in heaven at the sufferings of those in hell, and that people would be laughing at the sufferings of their loved ones. So it was a pretty dark and depressing worldview. I was saved by the fact that my dad did not agree with this. So he was trained as a pastor, and I don't know why he stayed at that church, but I remember multiple times that we would be driving away on a Sunday morning and he would just be ripping the sermon to shreds in the car on the way
nice.
home. So I'm thankful for that. But we were in that church. My parents were still attending when I was 19 years old, and I got to the point where I had enough of it. And so I left for a non-denominational charismatic church. And that was a huge shift for me. That was kind of my first shift, where I went from seeing God as like basically this monster being to somebody who actually loved humanity and did his best to save humanity, but still wasn't powerful enough to pull it off. Mm-hmm. Fast forwarding through a lot of things, eventually I started to question the charismatic Arminian teachings as well, which is, as everybody is probably aware, that people by their own free will are choosing to go to hell, and God sent Jesus to die and save them from that fate. And only if we
I love that one.
accept his sacrifice and believe in his death and resurrection can we be saved. The first thing that caused me to start to question this whole narrative is that when I was pregnant with my first child, I decided to read the Bible in chronological order in 3 months because I figured I'm going to be really busy. I won't have a lot of time to study the Bible for a while, so I better make sure I do it now. And isn't it interesting that reading the Bible is the thing that caused me to walk away from the faith eventually? Because what I saw, 2 things that really surprised me. The first one is that the Bible, if you put the message of the Bible together, the message of the Bible is not believe in Jesus for the forgiveness of your sins. The message of the Bible is love your neighbor. So all throughout the Old Testament, it's take care of the poor and needy, welcome the foreigner, take care of the widow, stop shedding innocent blood. This is what I want from you. And then in the New Testament with the Gospels, you have Jesus talking about love your neighbor, love your enemy, pray for those who persecute you, do unto the least of these what you would do unto me. And then we have Paul's letters. And at the time, I didn't know the difference between his authentic letters and the fake letters of Paul. So I don't know for sure what the difference were, but I just remember thinking, this seems like really off and really wrong somehow. And a lot of those books were not sitting right with me. And suddenly now we're jumping to believe in Jesus through faith for the forgiveness of your sins. And it just seemed like it came out of left field. So I came away with the conclusion that Christians were misunderstanding the Bible. And then the second thing that really stood out to me is that Jesus was teaching a works-based gospel. When Jesus was asked, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" You guys quote this all the time. He said, "Keep the commandments." And there's nothing in the Gospels about a blood sacrifice for sin. So it was like this huge revelation that happened that really tripped me up. And it took me a long time after that to actually walk away. It was a really slow death. It took me about 5 years to deconstruct and then 10 years to leave the church. But that's really what did it.
Wow. And how did your family react to you leaving slowly over time? Was there hostility? I mean, I'm sure so much of your life was involved with the church, just like Aaron's.
Yeah. When I made the initial switch to the charismatic church, my parents were concerned, but they were very supportive, and they ended up following me to that church eventually. When I left the faith completely, that was a different story. My family is very supportive and very loving, and they disagree with me, but they've supported me every step of the way. But the same can't be said for the church community and other relationships that I had in my life. That was quite a disaster the way that went down.
Oh, you too. Interesting.
Yes. I had, I don't know. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's fascinating to hear your story because it's so similar to my own. And I'm sure it's similar to many, many people listening to this. It depends on what denomination of Christianity you came out of. You kind of came out of two, it sounds like. Calvinism, which is like God predestined and invented this whole shit show.
Right.
And you should be glad about it. Yeah. And then evangelicalism or Protestantism in general is more like, look, God's just not capable of handling God's own universe. So don't blame God. You're choosing hell. And you just imagine this long queue line of people waiting to dive into the lake of fire. You're like, that doesn't sit right either. So you kind of like can shift around for a little bit. And I'm glad I didn't end up shifting much. I just kind of like exit stage left, when I came to all these same conclusions. But it was the same for me as you described, almost word for word. Like first it was this understanding of, hey, Jesus didn't teach any of this faith alone, saved by grace, easy believism, Paul stuff. It's all good works and righteous living. And if you don't love the least of these, you're not getting into the kingdom of heaven, dude. And it's like so many people get angry when they see this because most people go to church and it's like, turn in your Bibles to 1 Corinthians. And you go to, Paul and you read Paul and just Paul. And then they'll reference Jesus every so often, mostly just as a blood meat sacrifice, but, rose again and all that good stuff. Back to Paul, Ephesians, turn in your Bibles to the book of Philemon. And they never really dive into the Bible for themselves. And when you're just reading Paul all the time, you're like, yeah, this is the message of the Bible. And so I find it super funny and ironic, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Melissa, that in our comment section, in my comment section on Instagram especially, like the most common response to when Christians are upset about us pointing out these major flaws is they'll say, well, you clearly have never read the Bible before, or you just need to read the Bible for yourself. Yep. And I'm like, my friend, that is the reason people leave the church. You should be very careful telling people to read the Bible for themselves. And of course, it shows their own innocence of like, they don't know that they're in this thought system that's trapped them into a paradigm that's totally false when you actually investigate it for yourself. But you must get lots of scrutiny and angry commenters as well, since you teach so much stuff similarly. So has that been kind of your experience of the way Christians will approach you on these topics?
Oh, yes. Usually they approach me quoting a bunch of Bible verses that and then asking me to respond to a lot of Bible verses that I've already responded to, which is very interesting.
That's the best, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Never saw that one before.
Egad. Yeah.
But to your point, what you were saying about Jesus, it's so interesting because when I was growing up in church, they would be so dismissive of Jesus's actual words. It would be like, well, what Paul says, we have to confess and believe and accept his blood sacrifice by faith in order to be saved. Be careful that you don't get astray by Jesus's teachings. They would literally say things like, that's a good moral standard, but that won't save you.
Yeah. Like Jesus was just teaching a bunch of stuff that'll send everybody right to hell.
Yep.
Like, all you had to do, man, was give us the one bar. Confess me as Lord, believe in my resurrection. Boom, you're all saved. And I mean, the other thing for us that we talk about a lot of just how almost cartoonishly silly the whole idea is you're telling me that one of the most evil, corrupted men on earth at that time, Saul of Tarsus, who was a serial killer of Christians, he gets this free pass into eternal life because he's over there just seething, full of blood vengeance, looking for the next Nazarenes to kill, going to Damascus under the order of Caiaphas to murder more of Jesus's followers. And then, boom, knocked off a horse, Jesus appears. I'm Jesus the Nazarene, whom you're persecuting. Oh my gosh, Lord. And then you're my new chosen disciple. And I'm going to tell you all my secrets in private visions. And so Paul's just getting this VIP pass to Jesus in private. And it's like, okay, look, if anyone deserved that, it wouldn't have been Saul of Tarsus. Give it to some well-meaning Hindu or Buddhist who's like trying to love their neighbor and, just fallen on the wrong religion. But no, he gives it to Paul, and Christians celebrate that as if like, see, isn't God great? It's like, no, my friend, I don't think that's very great that one of the most evil, corrupted men gets a free pass when millions of beautiful, righteous, heart-centered people who just wandered into the wrong religion or were born into the wrong religion, they have to go to hell forever because they didn't hear Paul's gospel. And so it's just almost frustrating sometimes. It's like Christianity just becomes this check your brain at the door club, because all of these ideas you have to accept, these presuppositions you have to accept, are so cartoonishly silly that of course you get dogmatically angry at people like you and I and us who point out these flaws. And so I don't blame Christians for getting angry and responding in the ways that they do. But it's interesting, right? It's like, guys, we're saying this stuff not because we want to ruin your day or be jerks or invent a heresy or become false prophets, like they say. Like, we were born in the church. We love Jesus. We're trying to help you guys get out of the mess you're in. And at least you would think that would be something that they could acknowledge. Well, you're a good person, you mean well, but you just got some ideas wrong. But it's never that. There's never any concessions. It's like, you are pure evil for pointing out these obvious contradictions. And I think that says a lot, right, about the thought system that they're in.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because a lot of these comments, like you said, they come with a lot of insults, like you're evil, false teacher, like whatever unkind name you can come up with. So it begs the question, what kind of religion are you following? What kind of deity are you following? And it's not surprising because that is the character of the Christian God.
Mm-hmm.
This is exactly what I wanted to ask you about, and you've talked a lot on your channel about this. It's not that Christianity has gone astray from the teachings of Jesus, but it's actually in the Old and New Testament, I don't know how else to say it, satanic inversions have been introduced through these concepts of blood sacrifice, an angry, vengeful, warlike deity. This is a complete inversion of the loving character of the omnipotent creator of the universe. So I was wondering if you could touch on this satanic inversion of Christianity.
Yeah, I would love to. One of the things that I think we've all noticed about Christianity, and one of the things that caused me to deconstruct, is that I realized it is a religion of worshiping power. And I can't tell you how many times when I was growing up, I would ask a question and the answer would be given, he's God, he can do whatever he wants. Who are we to question him? And that's just supposed to be the end of it. And so I began to understand when I started studying, having a greater understanding of metaphysics through studying near-death experiences, and Aaron, the content that you put out about the law of one, and then going back and reading for myself and understanding that there's the two polarities that we can follow. And your viewership is already very familiar with this, so I probably don't need to go into a lot of detail, but we have the choice in this density of consciousness to choose either the negative polarity of service to self or the positive polarity of service to others. And this, I'm getting to what you asked about blood sacrifice with this. And so when we follow the service to others path, we're going in alignment with reality, which is oneness and unity. And we evolve into the heart chakra. We bring the heart chakra online. And this is how spiritual gifts and abilities develop naturally, because when you're living in oneness, you're living in unity and connection to other people. You're giving yourself in service to others. You're offering your power and your love to others. This is how spiritual gifts develop naturally. This is how healing gifts, telepathic gifts, whatever you want to talk about, develop naturally, because you're in service and you're offering to one another. But on the service to self path, an entity is basically on its own. It's struggling against the natural flow of the universe. And Aaron, you've described it like it's a black hole taking and pulling into itself. And you can only progress so far on that path before you have to start using manipulation and control to get more and more power. And so I would say probably most of the world's religions, I'd be curious if you agree with me on this, lean towards service to others with teachings about love and service and present moment awareness and enlightenment.
No doubt.
But there are the paths that lead towards service to self, specifically with the occult, where people are using things like black magic and blood sacrifice and energy harvesting to trick other people into giving up their power and take it for themselves. And so when you understand that, it becomes really clear that if you have an entity that is demanding worship, demanding power, like, I'm God, I know best, don't you dare question me, that is a negatively polarized entity. A positively polarized entity would never behave in that way. So this is how we know that a good and benevolent God would never demand worship, would never demand blood sacrifice. And it's interesting because I have interviewed a couple of people who were involved in child trafficking rings. One, and specifically, her name is Max Lowen. She was raised in a child trafficking ring. Her uncle ran a facility in Rome. And so she has all these memories of going into underground tunnels, and these tunnels connected underneath the Vatican. And she says that there was a throne to Satan down there, and they were doing all kinds of absolute horrific things. And I won't repeat a lot of it because it's just absolutely disgusting what's happening down there, but it involves blood sacrifice, human sacrifice. And so these things are happening underneath the Vatican, and the Catholic Church is involved, which raises huge red flags. But then when you start to think about how the cornerstone of the modern day Christian religion is blood sacrifice, it starts to make sense. And I was watching an interview with somebody who converted to Christianity, but he used to be the leader of the Satanist group in South Africa. And he was sharing his experience, and he said that in order to progress up the ranks in Satanism, animal sacrifice is the entry-level sacrifice requirement, and it only gets worse and worse from there. And so here we have Christianity, which is a religion built on the fact that God demanded the blood sacrifice of the most holy person to ever live in order to be able to forgive sins. That is absolutely demonic. And I think that Christianity has a really hard time using discernment, differentiating between God or positively polarized entities that are here to help us and negatively polarized entities or demons, because the entire system is based on a demonic ritual.
Man, it just sends chills up your spine thinking about it. Just seeing those connections you pulled out is chilling. That Christianity literally mirrors Satanism point for point on this idea that blood sacrifice is the way. in some form. And I mean, it's like, hey, if it's this way now, how much worse do you think it was in Jesus's day, in the first century? Like,
right.
Blood sacrifice is, and we say this on the show, but it just keeps bearing repeating, like, blood sacrifice is exclusively and strictly a pagan practice that predates Judaism by thousands of years. It is not a Jewish practice. It did not originate in Judaism. It originated in pagan religions. And in Jesus's day, I'm sure there was plenty of satanic cults and religions that were also doing blood sacrifice. And so just imagine the anger and wrath that Yeshua and his disciples felt, and the Essenes and all the sects that rejected the temple. They're like, you guys have brought the most satanic practice of all into God's holy temple, and you say that it's what God desires? So you're basically saying that God is like Satan. And this is why, I don't know if you've studied Gnosticism much, Melissa, but this is one of the things that Gnostics got right, is they said, hey, that Old Testament Yahweh, that's for sure a negatively polarized entity.
Right.
They called it a demon, demiurge. But same idea, a negative entity is a demon, basically, right? And there's echoes and remnants of this in the New Testament as well, and some of it even in the Gospel of John, where Jesus tells the Pharisees, like, we're of our father Abraham. How can you say that you're before Abraham? And he's like, oh, you are of your father, the devil. And it's like, wait, what? Jesus, they follow Yahweh. They read the Hebrew Bible. They keep all the commandments of Yahweh. They're of their father, the devil. It's like, clearly, I think he was indicating, like, you don't understand what manner of spirit you're of. You don't have the discernment to see between the positive, negative polarities. And that's, again, why Christianity in all denominations, Catholicism, EO, it doesn't matter. All branches of Christianity rob people of their discernment and intuition, because they say, look, you're evil, as you said, Melissa, totally depraved. And so you're not trustworthy. You can't rely on your own intuition to know what's right and wrong. Listen to this priest, this bishop, this pastor, and read what they say is in the Bible. And it's like, whoa, you guys think this is bad now? Think about what happened for the first 1,500 years of Catholicism and Christianity, when most people weren't even literate and weren't even allowed to read the Bible for a long time. And you could only get the scriptures read by going to church and mass and letting a priest read it to you. So the negative polarity has used Christianity, Catholicism as this, I think it's the most powerful weaponized structure on earth for the negative polarity, and has been for millennia now. And so I'm so grateful that people like yourself are waking up to this really inconvenient fact that a religion that has a whole lot of good in it, of course, has the teachings of Jesus in it, has also been used by the negative polarity to wreak all kinds of evil and control and domination over planet Earth. And so, as Jesus said, you got to be able to parse the wheat from the chaff. And Jesus says, I will separate the wheat from the chaff, the sheep from the goats. And when you read the Bible, that's the spirit you got to have, the discernment you got to use of, look, this book, just because it's full of human error doesn't mean it's pure evil or something. You shouldn't just toss it into the dumpster, as a lot of people do, but read it with discernment, because this is why Jesus taught us what the greatest commandment is. You can just read the Bible with this one barometer. And Christians ask us this all the time, Melissa, and probably you as well. Well, what grounding do you use to know what's true and what's not in the Bible? You just trust your own mind? And it's like, no, I trust the words of Jesus. Jesus is my standard. And he said, this is the greatest commandment. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. Do no harm, do unto others. That's the golden rule. So if I read a Bible verse that contradicts that, that's for sure a man-made verse, not a divine verse. And so that's how I read it. I read it as that. And there's a lot we can still learn from the man-made stuff, but let's allow human discernment and intuition back into the forefront again, because Jesus said the kingdom's within you. Jesus said, I'm sending you the Holy Spirit who will lead you into all truth. And so we have that guidance within us. Of course, if we are from God, if we are made by God, the Creator, we have God's wisdom and love in us already, and we can rely on it for discernment. So I want to ask you next, Melissa, what would you say was the moment where you woke up to this, everything you just described? What was it that cracked the brick wall for you, so to speak? Because it tends to be kind of an impenetrable, belief system for people to question. What was it that caused you to question, wait a minute, this whole blood sacrifice thing might actually be something evil that has, woven its way into the Bible, and not something that's actually from God?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And when I originally deconstructed, I had initially landed in Christian universalism. And so I believed
me
that
too, for a little bit.
Did you really?
Mm-hmm.
I believed that Jesus did die as a blood sacrifice, but to save the whole world, that everyone would eventually be reunited to God. And
Yeah.
as a newly deconstructed Christian, of course, the most important question in my mind is understanding who Jesus was, what he did, what his sacrifice was all about. And so I was searching and searching for this answer. And I started to research atonement theories. And that's a whole other rabbit trail that we could go down. But atonement theories have evolved over the last 2,000 years, and penal substitutionary atonement theory didn't even come on the scene until the 1500s, I believe, with the
Yeah, something like
Reformation.
that.
And so that was the first red flag right there. Well, for the first 1,500 years after Jesus, nobody believed this. But then I started taking these atonement theories back to the Bible to see what it said. And I noticed that Paul had a lot to say about atonement theories, and Jesus had nothing to say about it. So that was the second red flag, because it's like, if this was something that we were supposed to know about, we're supposed to, like, the message of Christianity, you have to believe in the death and resurrection or you will die and go to hell. If it was that important, why didn't Jesus say a single thing about it?
Great
I mean,
question.
there are some passages where he mentions his death, and some of those arguably could be interpolations, but he never puts any emphasis, no importance, no, you need to believe on me to apply this to yourself. None of that.
Yeah.
But I guess I would say the real third red flag happened to me years later, after I had long deconstructed, when I began to understand that blood sacrifice is actually a satanic ritual that is alive and well in the world today, that it is actually practiced, and it is practiced in Satanism. And so for me, that was kind of like, that was where it really got me. Like, oh, there is satanic influence in this religion. Not that everybody is following Satanism. Like you said, there's a lot of good people, a lot of good teachings, but there is definitely some satanic influence infiltrated into the religion through this blood sacrifice doctrine. And I believe, like you said, that the negative polarity has intentionally done this. And it's not just infiltrated Christianity, it's infiltrated a lot of the world's systems of power as well.
This is such a fascinating conversation. And as I'm listening, I'm realizing that baked into Christianity with all the blood sacrifice and penal substitution is a violation of Yeshua's greatest commandment, because first it's love God with all your heart, soul, mind. But loving God, like, it involves having a correct understanding of the nature of God. And I mean, God is so wonderful and magnificent beyond our wildest imagination. But if you have a fundamental misunderstanding or belief about God's character, then can you really genuinely love God? Like, if you're dating someone and they're a very nice person and you're like, yeah, they love blood sacrifice. They're like, what? Why would you think that? No, you do. I tell everyone you love blood sacrifices. They're like, oh, are you really loving that person if you're so massively mischaracterizing who they are? So that just hit me like a ton of bricks. And because it's first loving God, and then the second, really, it's the second greatest commandment is loving neighbor. It's how you show you love God. So with this conversation, Melissa, if this mainstream belief in Jesus as the blood meat sacrifice is incorrect, what is your understanding of who Yeshua was, who he is, and what his role is, and how are we supposed to, what is the proper way to actually follow him?
I love that question, and we could go so deep into that question because there's so many different perspectives to answer that from a historical perspective. I mean, we could talk about what we know historically, which you guys are more well versed in than I am, but we know that he was an apocalyptic teacher who came to teach, I believe, to restore the law of Moses back to what it was originally intended to be, which is the law of love. I mean, that's very clearly stated in the New Testament. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. There's other sources that I've studied which can't be historically verified, of course, and I'm always careful to say that, but there's near-death experiences. There is the law of one and its perspective. There is so many other different perspectives. There's the perspective of the Eastern masters on Jesus, and Yogananda has some really interesting things to say in Autobiography of a Yogi. My personal opinion on this is that Jesus is a highly advanced soul who chose to come to the planet to be a perfect demonstration of the nature of God. And we see a lot of this come out in the book of John, where the claim that's being made all throughout the book of John is that I am here to do the Father's works. I'm here basically to show you what God looks like and to bring you into this intimacy union with God. And so the law of one talks about how Jesus was a perfectly evolved fourth density being who could have gone on to fifth density but came back to perfectly live out what the nature of God looks like through love and service to others, up to and including giving his life as a martyr. And so I think that if there is any significance to Jesus's death on the cross, any spiritual significance to that, it's in the fact that he freely gave his life, not that God demanded a blood sacrifice. Because it talks about this in the book of John a couple of times where he states that he is, greater love has no man than this, than the one who lays down his life for his friend. And I am doing the Father's works, implying that this is what God looks like. Not that God demands a blood sacrifice in order to feed his power and forgive the sin of the planet, but God lays down God's life in order to help humanity. So that's one way that we can look at it. But another way that we can look at it is, again, I mentioned Yogananda, and he talks in Autobiography of a Yogi about how some of the great Eastern masters would intentionally take the karma of their disciples into their body and burn it off in their flesh. Yeah. And so there's this instance where his master Sri Yukteswar becomes deathly ill because he's burning off the karma of his disciples, and he intends to die. His plan is to die and leave the planet in doing that so that he can help his disciples advance. And Yogananda begs him not to do it, so he stays. And then Yogananda explains that this is something that advanced spiritual masters can do and sometimes do choose to do, to take the suffering of other people into their bodies. Meanwhile, their consciousness stays in bliss because they're doing it for love and service. So there's all these different perspectives that we could take, but ultimately, I think that Jesus came to show us the way of love, to show us the nature of God, and to help humanity get back on track and to give us a better vision of where we could head with our future. We don't have to continue in this way that we're going of war and suffering and famine and pain and misery, that we can come together, we can follow the way of love and unity, and we can rise above that, and we can create a much better world. I think that that's what Jesus came to show us ultimately.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said.
So
and thanks for breaking down all those different perspectives, because I think there's just a lot of truth in all of them. And I love that you brought up the taking on of karma, because that is something that many, many sages and masters have been said to do. And in fact, Ramana Maharshi was also famous for that, because any video you watch of Ramana Maharshi in those old black and white, films from the early 1900s, he's like crippled, he's got cancer, he's always walking with a cane and stuff. Mm-hmm. And his disciples ask him why he's so ill if he's so self-realized. And he says, because I'm always taking upon the vasanas of my disciples. Vasanas is like the mental tendencies and patterns and thought patterns and stuff. He's taking away their karma, basically, and absorbing it. And they begged him not to do it. And he said, oh, it's not a matter of choice. The self, he called God the self within me does it automatically. It's just, I can't stop the love from pouring out. So he's like, so maybe just stop sinning and I'll be here a little longer, you know? But I think that's kind of what Yeshua was doing, to your point. I think Jesus knew something has to happen. Some galvanizing act must happen to tear down this satanic, demonic temple cult and the way it's corrupted the law of God. And I think he knew, if I go in, if a man as righteous as Yeshua knew, if I go in and I oppose it with righteous zeal publicly and make a spectacle of it, and then I get killed for it, all of the thousands and thousands of masses of people who follow me are going to see what I see. They're going to see, wow, this temple cult really is the most wicked, abominable thing on this planet. They killed the Holy Son of God. And so I think it's, like, to your point, it's such a demonic inversion for the Greco-Roman Christian religion to turn around a century or two later and say, actually, it wasn't the temple cult that murderously destroyed the Son of God. It was God himself, actually. And it even pleased God to crush him, they say, using the Isaiah prophecy wrongly and just inverting it all, that it was actually God, not the evil satanic temple cult that did this. So anytime you're confronting the negative polarity, this is one of the giveaways. You always know, because all you have to do is look for inversions, right? As you said, Melissa, the negative polarity can't do anything of its own. It has to take what's real and invert it for its own purposes. And nothing has happened worse than that than in the Christian religion, in my opinion. So what I want to segue to next then is one of your favorite topics that we share, which is near-death experiences. Because I think NDEs are one of the greatest miracles in town on this planet for this reason that we're talking about. That millions, billions of people actually are trapped in these religious thought systems that have so inverted truth that nobody can tell up from down anymore. And we just believe whatever the priest says. And I think God knows this predicament. And I think Yeshua saw the same predicament in his day. And that's why he tried to reform his own religion, similarly as we're doing, right? But one of the only proofs external to the religion, the Bible, and Jesus is NDEs, that real people every day, just like you and I, have NDEs, death experiences, where they pass across the veil and they encounter God, Jesus, angels, and soulmates, and all these things. And they learn the secrets of the universe, which are always incredibly simple. It's like people come back from death probably every day on this planet and say, guys, it's actually really simple, man. The whole universe is just like a big morality test, you know? Can you love people? Can you be kind, as Jesus said? So you interview people that have had NDEs on your channel, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'd love to hear from you then, as an NDE interviewer and researcher. Like, what are some of the most shocking NDEs, or the ones that stick to you the most in your mind, the stories you've heard that you think really say the most about what we're talking about? That this universe is not about confessing and believing in doctrines in your brain, but it's about how you live. What do you think NDEs have to teach us about this?
Yeah, absolutely. My favorite topic. As far as specific NDEs, are you familiar with Howard Storm?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. He was my gateway into NDEs, because I was still a Christian yeah. And I think that his story is very representative of NDEs where Jesus appears across the board. But he has a really extensive experience with Jesus where he gets to ask a lot of questions. And the first thing that caught my interest as a Christian watching this NDE is that Jesus saved him right out of hell, which is no surprise to either of you that happens all the time. And it's also interesting that Jesus is very often the one that comes to save people out of hell, which says something about Jesus. But of course, we're taught that hell is eternal and there's no escape from it, but yet Jesus pulls people out of hell all the time in near-death experiences. Mm-hmm. And then one of the questions that Howard asked Jesus is, what is the correct religion? And Jesus told him, there's good people in bad religions and bad people in good religions, but the right religion for you is the one that brings you closest to God, which shows that there is no religious dogma that you have to believe in order to be saved. And then the final thing that is fascinating to me about that account is when Jesus tells Howard that he needs to return to Earth, Howard asks what he wants him to do, And he offers to build Jesus a shrine so that the world can come and worship him, which should be great according to religion, that Jesus should want to be worshipped. But
should be licking
Jesus
his
tells him,
chops.
right? Jesus tells him, I have no purpose for a shrine. I don't need people to come and worship me. What I want you to do is go back to earth and love the person that you're with. And he straight up tells him in this argument that they get into that this is what will change the world, and this is God's plan, and it is going to happen. And he shows Howard visions of the future, the possible futures that we could be headed towards. One is the way of turmoil and hardship if we continue to refuse to love our neighbor, and one is the way of paradise and harmony and peace on earth. And then he tells Howard, eventually we will get to the place of having paradise on earth. And this is repeated across NDEs over and over and over, that this is the end goal, this is where we're headed, and this is what Jesus came to help accomplish. But we have to do our part, and he's not coming back a second time on the clouds of heaven, riding a white horse with a sword to save us. We've created these issues down here, and we have to make them right. He's already done his part, and now we need to just simply learn to love our neighbor. And so that's the message that comes out over and over and over in one NDE after another, is that what Jesus wants from us is not for us to believe dogma or to even to worship him, but it is to just learn to love each other. And it's so simple, because another thing that comes out over and over in NDEs all the time is the life review. And I could give examples of this if you want me to, but it's so interesting because people are taken through basically like a 3D hologram of their life, and they experience every moment that they ever lived from their perspective and from the perspective of everyone and everything that they interacted with. And what they're shown that it's the smallest little things that they do that cause the huge ripple effect. So getting, being successful in sports or in your career or whatever it is, those things don't matter. It's when you give someone a genuine smile, or you take a moment to notice somebody, these things that come not for being noticed or for praise, but simply because you want to do good for someone else. You have good, loving intentions. Those things create this huge ripple effect that they can then see how that went out to influence thousands of people from that one small action. And so that's when you take that back to like quantum physics and some of the things that we know now about how things work on the quantum level, and how our intentions, our thoughts are like, I don't know all the science behind this, so I don't want to make claims that aren't accurate, but I know that they can measure the brain waves of your thoughts, and they're actually a tangible thing that proceed out of you and affect the world around you. And so I think a lot of times people have this really hopeless attitude about the world, especially if you're raised in religion where you're taught that everybody's going to end up in hell, and God's coming to judge the world and basically burn it up. But the reality is that we have all the power. The power is with us, and whether or not we choose loving intentions. And those small loving intentions build up, and they create such a powerful ripple effect that we have the power to change the world through them. Mm-hmm. And so I may have gotten off track with your question.
No, that was great.
That was great.
In fact, you made me think of Luke 8, one of my favorite passages, probably my favorite passage that confirms what you're saying about Jesus's gospel was about love, and that's the way to eternal life, is the woman who sits at Jesus's feet and washes his feet with her hair, right? And the disciples rebuke her and try to tell Jesus to get her out of this room or whatever. And he rebukes them in return and says, I tell you the truth, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. And then if that wasn't clear enough, he says, but to anyone who loves little will be forgiven little. So like Jesus literally equates the amount of love you give is how much forgiveness you get back. That's also Luke 6:37. The measure you give is the measure you get back. Jesus couldn't have made it any more clear. It's unmissable if you're reading the words of Jesus as your highest priority. But when you have to harmonize everything, then yeah, you have to keep throwing Paul in the mix to excuse away everything Jesus is saying. And I think this is why Christians have these big wake-up calls when they have NDEs, is because they realize that they've been taught everything totally backwards, that in fact it is very simple, and our hearts and our intuition knows that it's simple. But if you don't give priority to good works, then you're giving priority to your own thinking and believing in your brain, which is inherently selfish and self-focused. It's like, it's all about me. Salvation is about me. But A Course in Miracles is another text I know you love as well as myself, that it flips the script on this and says, no, freedom is about how much you give away. The amount of freedom, aka forgiveness and non-judgment, you give to others is what you get back, just as Jesus taught himself. And the other thing the Course says that really set me free from all this blood atonement stuff is this idea of sacrifice being something that is impossible for God. Not only does God not do it or not want it, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, as Jesus said, but God can't ask us for sacrifice because that would violate God's own nature. And what sacrifice is, in the Course's terminology, is this idea that you would have to give up something good to have something good, right? And if God's nature is goodness, omnibenevolence, if God is love, then God can never ask you to sacrifice part of himself to have part of himself, give up something good to get salvation. And so what is more an obvious fallacy than the death of Jesus Christ on the cross being something that earns salvation? So God had to do something insidiously evil, right? God had to kill the most good man, had to die. The most holy man had to die so that we can not die. Like, if that's not a clear contradiction, I don't know what is. And so again, NDEs are just, to me, this light from heaven that God has shown onto our planet of, look, I can save you all from this destructive thought system you're trapped in by just looking what happens in reality when people die. They don't come back saying, guys, trust me, it's all about confessing and believing. Nobody says that. And even Christians don't say that. And if reality itself isn't good enough evidence, but we're ignoring it so we can believe what we think a pastor says about the Bible, like, we're obviously way off track. And so NDEs are like one of the only miracles in town that can really just unravel the cognitive dissonance for people very quickly. And so I'm curious if you've had a lot of experience either interviewing Christians who've had NDEs or just through your own research, and what are some interesting things you found about Christian near-death experiences?
Yeah, Christian near-death experiences, I would say I've probably read more than I have interviewed. I've interviewed a couple of people who were Christians, but they all come back saying the same things, like you mentioned, that they usually still like really highly value Jesus, but they come back with an understanding that separate Jesus from the Christian religion. That the Christian religion is not the only path to God. There are many ways that a soul can follow to be reunited with the Creator, but the ultimate gold standard is the standard of love. And that's what's emphasized over and over and over, is that Jesus is incredibly loving in near-death experiences. He's this incredibly loving being of overwhelming light and love who doesn't show any judgment towards people. Even when they're going through their life review, people will usually make a point to say, when I was going through my life review and seeing all the worst moments of my life, Jesus was standing next to me, or was next to me, supporting me and loving me through it, and I was judging myself, which is an interesting tie into the passages in the New Testament where Jesus says, I didn't come to judge the world.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Side note. But yeah, people come back, Christians typically come back from near-death experiences with an understanding that it's all about love. I need to love my neighbor, and that's what Jesus came to preach, to teach us, is one, how to access the divine presence within us, because that's another thing that I didn't touch on yet that comes out in near-death experiences all the time, is that God is love, everything is divine. And so we're all a part of the divine essence. And so a lot of times Christian NDEers will come back with this knowledge of, oh, I get it now. Jesus came to point us to the divine nature within us and to express that through loving actions and recognize that same divine nature in other people.
I love it. So my question to you is, if God is love and we all have a divine nature, why does this hellish realm seem to exist based on many near-death experiences? It does seem like a percentage of people have very negative, dark, demonic experiences. What is the utility of that? What is the purpose? And from all of your interviews, is this a real phenomena?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. It's something that so many people, it scares people, as you guys know, especially growing up in Christianity, how terrifying it can be. And then when you have NDEs where people are experiencing this hellish realm, it can be really scary and confusing for people. So there's a few things. I have a few thoughts about it. The first one is that I think in some cases, maybe people's brains are creating this experience, because I have noticed a correlation with people who pass due to drug overdoses who have hellish experiences. And so I think there can be a connection there. Another thing is, a lot of times hellish experiences happen during comas and not when a person is clinically dead. And a lot of interesting things can happen during comas because people will have a lot of hallucinations as well when they're in comas. These are just personal observations. I don't know if there's any statistics to back this up. Another thought that I have is that because our thoughts and our state of being really is creative, and there are multiple levels to the afterlife, for lack of a better word, that people experience, that I think that maybe on some of, well, okay, so to take a step back, some experiencers like Howard Storm and others talk about heaven, or the afterlife, like there's layers. So there's the lower realms where we create with our thought forms, and then there's the highest realms that are too different from anything we've ever experienced to be able to describe and put into words, and being purely in the presence of God in a pure state of oneness that's beyond experience. But so I think that possibly in some of the lower realms, for lack of a better word, we can create with our collective thought forms, and that we could, like, out of the misery and suffering that we are carrying within our consciousness, we could be creating an experience of a hellish realm that doesn't actually exist. And one of the reasons why I think this is because I've talked to multiple people who have experienced a hellish realm, seemingly the same hellish realm. People talk about being in this like gray landscape where souls are just completely consumed and obsessed with themselves and their own pain, reliving the worst moments of their life that they experienced. And multiple people have experienced the same place. And then as soon as they typically have a thought about God, about Jesus, that I could be saved, I don't want to stay here, as soon as their mind even opens to that possibility, Jesus appears. There was one woman I interviewed where she was in this place, and I don't remember exactly. Oh, she saw somebody in this landscape that she had the thought, I wonder if that was Judas Iscariot. And as soon as she thought about Judas, she thought about Jesus. And as soon as she thought about Jesus, suddenly she realized that he was standing next to her.
You called?
So all it took was her thinking about Jesus for him to be there. And then she became aware that God was outside of this realm waiting for her to wake up and ask for help. And Jesus was right next to her the whole time, waiting to help her. And so, one, whatever this place is, it's absolutely not eternal. We're only stuck there by our own consciousness, our own thoughts. They're keeping us trapped in like this really closed off, self-centered state of consciousness. And literally Jesus is there, beings are there waiting to help us at the very first opportunity. So that can bring comfort to a lot of people, I think. And so there's a lot of things that we don't know and don't have the answers for. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I know all of it. There's a lot of things that we can't measure. We don't have statistics for, we don't have answers for. But what I do know is that this suffering is never eternal. Suffering is always self-inflicted by our own consciousness, if that makes sense. And so we are on this evolutionary journey. The law of one, again, talks about how we have been expressed out of God's being, and now we are these fragments of God's consciousness that are slowly but surely evolving back towards God. And part of the purpose of that evolution is to have experiences of the contrast. And so we have we have hellish experiences here on earth. We have hellish experiences in this realm all the time. And those hellish experiences are always caused by an incorrect perception and an inability to see what Jesus called the kingdom of heaven, which is the divine presence that is within and without everywhere. And so another thought that I've had is that sometimes these hellish experiences could potentially be an experience that we wanted to have to further increase the contrast. And that might not be comforting to some people, but I have heard stories and spoken to people where they had a heavenly experience, and then they died again and had a hellish experience. Then they died again and had a heavenly experience, and it was just an experience. And when they're in the hellish experience, the purpose is to remember who you are, to be able to get outside of yourself and ask for help, or remember who you are, or become aware of the light within yourself. Mellon Thomas Benedict is one of the most well-known experiences. Yeah, and he had a hellish experience at the beginning, and then he became aware of the light that was within himself and was immediately transported out of it. So I think that sometimes these hellish experiences can be just an extension of that contrast that we wanted to experience as souls, to sort of say, okay, like lifting weights at a gym, how can I handle a bigger weight? How far away can I put myself from my own true nature and remember who I am?
Yeah, that's really well said. And you know what? You said something that also touched on another big piece of why religious people misunderstand what the afterlife is that when you're taught what to think, not how to think, you're taught, okay, hell is definitely an eternal realm. If you go there, you're cooked forever, no getting out. But when I was deconstructing, the first thing that went for me, the first card in the house of cards was the rapture. I was just like, this is so ludicrous, this whole idea. And pre-trib, post-trib, mid-trib, what are we talking about, man? This is nonsense. And then after I deconstructed the rapture, I had learned a little bit more of how to think, how to read the scriptures with a curious eye, rather than to continually impose this framework I've been given on it, because I'm always just going to see the same thing when I read it. And so I took that lesson into hell next, which was the next card that I deconstructed. And I wanted to see, can I disprove hell with the Bible? Because I hadn't deconstructed from biblical inerrancy yet. So I'm like, if I'm going to disavow this belief in an eternal hell chamber bad people go to, it needs to be from the Bible itself. And one of the things that helped me was realizing the difference between time and eternity. When even in the New Testament, in Revelations and whatnot, when Jesus says, and those who have done evil deeds will be cast into the everlasting fire, where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. He didn't say, and you will never escape that realm of everlasting fire. He just said, you'll be thrown into the realm of everlasting fire. So it's like, that's how eternity works. That's how the timelessness, the realm of timelessness works, is that there is a place that is burning in everlasting fire forever. The realm is what's eternal because, as you said, there's levels to consciousness. And there always have been, and there always will be. Jesus says no such thing as, and you can never return from that everlasting realm. He just says, look, you do bad things, you go to the bad place. So it's like, okay, there's a bad place, is basically all Jesus is saying. And we impose this framework of, and you never leave, and God tortures you forever. And when your intuition starts waking up, you're like, wait a minute. There's literally nothing more unjustifiable than to say that God would take a finite being who, again, has no choice not to be born sinful, as the Calvinists say, totally depraved. You have no choice in the matter. Okay, so taking a finite being with no choice not to be evil and punishing them for an infinity of time, the most unjustifiable, unjust thing possible. And so NDEs again begin to wake us up to these facts and give us a better context for even what Jesus meant when he talked about this realm of weeping and gnashing of teeth. I personally believe, Melissa, that Jesus was warning us of these realms that people go to when they pass over and they've done evil deeds and they've accumulated all this negative karma. You have to go to a realm that matches your karma, positive or negative, because God has given us free will. God will not impose upon us a good afterlife if we've chosen a bad human life. So of course, if you go to an afterlife realm like you described, where there's all these people who are not aware of God, yeah, they're going to stay trapped there until they become aware of God. But as soon as the awareness of God or even Christ is there, then the light shows up, Christ shows up, and they're rescued from that realm. And so what better evidence for the kingdom of heaven is within you? The kingdom of heaven is an awareness of our oneness with God. And so if you don't want to be aware of God, all good. God won't force you to be aware. But if you are aware of God, then you're in the kingdom here and now. So we're already in heaven to the extent that we can be aware of it. And where we go in the afterlife is just a metaphysical equivalent of our awareness here on earth, right?
You know, it's funny. I think of Jesus always preaching repentance. And, you know, we like to think of repentance as self-auditing. And while y'all were talking, I'm like, it's kind of like a real life review. Jesus is like, look, you could do your life review now, or you could do it later.
Yeah, dude.
There's no getting around the suffering. Like, I'm recommending you do it now so you don't go to this hellish realm. But that's really what it is. Like, looking at your life, how can I be more loving? Where am I withholding love? Where am I being negative? Where am I spreading bad energy? And I just think it's so poetic because it's as above, so below, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Melissa, as we close here, we've touched on NDEs a bit. I want to go back to where we started with the history of the Jesus movement, the Nazarene sect that Jesus emerged from, and all the amazing things that took place in the first century that have kind of been lost to time in the pseudo-Catholic history that covered it up. I'd love for you to tell us, just because I know you're a passionate researcher into this as we are, what is currently one of your favorite mind-blowing revelations or things that you've studied about the Jesus movement and some of the lost history that we talk about that you think is really relevant to this conversation and just helping people understand what Yeshua came to teach?
That is such a good question. I think probably the most mind-blowing thing for me has been coming to an understanding of maybe the pillars of what Jesus's message actually was. And it's so different than what we're taught in Christianity. And with all the research that you guys have been bringing to light and making accessible to people, a lot of this understanding comes from learning about how the original Nazarene movement lived and what it taught and what the Dead Sea Scroll group lived and taught and the correlations there that you guys have broken down on this podcast so wonderfully, and understanding what was their lifestyle like, what did they value, and how does this all correlate with Jesus's teachings. And so there are certain pillars that I see coming up over and over again, and I'm curious actually if you guys would agree with this or add anything to it. But starting with the greatest commandment of love God and love your neighbor, I kind of like to phrase that as inner purification. The loving God part is the oneness with God that he talks about all throughout the book of John. Loving God, inner union with God is equal to inner purification, which correlates to a lot of Jesus's teachings about if your eye causes you to stumble or whatever, like going over the law of Moses and making it internal. Then, of course, we have the love your neighbor, which is love and compassion to all of life. And then 3 others that I notice coming up quite often are nonviolence, which correlates directly to the vegetarian diet. Communal living, which is hard to do in our day and age because we don't have a communal lifestyle, but it could translate into conscious living, simple living, generosity. And then the fifth is nature communion. So
Yeah.
baptism was huge with the Essenes and the Nazarenes. And I think it was, obviously it was about a ritual for the forgiveness of sins, but I think it was probably about more than that, because I know the Essene Gospels of Peace aren't necessarily, we don't know that they're historically accurate, although I heard you guys saying there's been some more research done on that. But it's just really fascinating to read through and see Jesus talking about the angel of water and the sun and like all these elements that are coming out now in circadian biology about how the sun is full of this information that is absolutely necessary for life, and running water is full of this information that is necessary for the life and health of your body and probably your spirit as well. And so to me, I kind of like to see that as like a really interesting thing to add. So those are kind of the 5 pillars that I've come up with. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
Oh, that's fun.
I love it.
First, James?
Yeah, it really resonates. I think those are absolutely the pillars. And I actually wanted to ask you, building on this concept, like say someone watched this podcast and they loved it and they resonated with everything you said. What would you tell them based on this? Like, what are some practical tips for someone just to live the way? Like, how can they implement these concepts into their everyday life?
I love that so much. I think the first and most important thing is love and service. Like that is the fast track to enlightenment, union with God, however you want to phrase it. And as we've reiterated, NDEs over and over and over, giving the message, go back and just love the person that you're with. It is so simple, not easy all the time, but it is very simple. Just make the loving choice, choose the loving thought, the loving action, whatever it may be. If you can just do that for the rest of your life, that would be enough. But if you want to take it deeper, you can also look at areas in your life where you can cause less harm. And that can be really complicated and challenging in our world because our entire system of life is based off of harm. Just the way that everything is mass produced and all of the suffering that happens in the supply chain for literally anything that you can buy. I think that one helpful tip can be that you can buy secondhand sometimes, or try to find ethical companies that you can support. Another practical tip would be to share. Even though we're not living a communal lifestyle, you can share with others. You can practice generosity and hospitality, and maybe not hold on to things so tightly as we have a tendency to do in our culture. Another thing would be just getting connected to nature, getting out under the sun, getting in running water, or taking cold showers if you don't have access to that. Can be kind of like a modern way to replicate the daily baptism. And finally, this one is what tends to be the hardest for people to hear, but taking a look at what's on your plate and whether or not you're contributing to the suffering of sentient conscious beings with our food choices, which is something I had to take a hard look at 2 years ago.
Yeah, as did we. We get this criticism from meat eaters who are offended by this message, understandably so. I was too for a while. But we get this reflection of like, you guys are just enforcing this on Jesus. You're making your little vegan standards. You're projecting them onto Jesus and making a Jesus in your own image.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, my friend, if I could only take you back in time with me 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and put you in my brain, and you could just see the cognitive dissonance firing when I was reading all these historical attestations that just numerous church fathers, the who's who, the Eusebius, the father of church history, all the 12 disciples of Jesus were strict vegetarians who abstained from flesh consumption. Hegesippus, James, the brother of Jesus, was raised a vegetarian from birth by the same mother Jesus had. Oh, so Mary raised one son to be a meat eater and another to be vegetarian? Like, that doesn't make sense. And just on and on and on. And like, we can drown people in historical attestations that the Jesus movement, the Nazarene sect, they were strict vegetarians. It was a vegetarian movement in a sense, not because they were pushing a dogma of diet. It was the diet's a byproduct of the embodiment of the golden rule that says, look, you cannot justify that Murdering innocent creatures against their will is what God wants or doesn't violate the golden rule axiom. There is nothing more precious or valuable to a living creature than its own life. And so to kill what God has made alive, to rob life from what doesn't want to die, is the most obviously spiritually negative thing one can ever do. And I started to realize these things. And like I had wrestled with this for a long time as a spiritual student myself on the journey. But I just believed a lot of the cultural propaganda and stuff that, well, you can't be healthy without meat and da 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 da. So a lot of what we try to do on this podcast is to bust these cultural myths that you need to have 200 grams of protein a day and eat animals to be healthy, and eating only plants will make you wither and die. We're trying to show people like, look how we're thriving even more so without eating flesh, and we're getting all of our nutrient needs met. And I think most people would admit, even if they eat meat or not, would say, yeah, like if I could get all my nutrient needs met and live a healthy, vibrant life without flesh, I would do it. They're just not fully convinced they can do it, which is understandable. And so I think it just, it's a spiritual matter more than it's a dietary matter. The switch has to make itself, and you cannot force this on people. You cannot tell people they should stop eating meat, which is why we don't do that. And we don't judge anybody who eats meat. Because I mean, give me a break. 2 years ago, we were having ribeyes at my house, James. We just want people to see what we see because we think spiritual embodiment is the name of the game. And if you can't embody the no harm principle in every way, then you've got some room to grow still. And we're all growing and we all have our blind spots and we're all learning. So it's all good. There's no judgment in it. But if you really want to take love your neighbor as yourself to the next level, there is no spiritual shift, as I'm sure you would say, Melissa, that is more profound than this one. When you realize, oh, darn it, like I have been contributing to the suffering of living beings and doing unto others what I would not want to be done unto myself. And so it feels so good when you make the shift. It doesn't feel like a sacrifice, as we said. You don't feel like you're giving up anything good when you decide to follow Jesus and his disciples in abstaining from flesh consumption. So maybe as we close, you could give us, I would love to hear your just quick overview of like, how was that shift for you? How did it happen? And then like, how did it feel within yourself when you made that shift?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. I love that topic. For me, two things collided at the same time. My health was going downhill very fast. I was dealing with extreme fatigue, all kinds of issues, like every issue, aching joints, headaches, poor sleep, poor digestion. I was diagnosed with colitis, just everything. I just felt like I could not catch a break. And I had tried the animal-based diet for years and it was not helping. And secondly, I started to run across information online about what was happening specifically in the slaughterhouses because I was already aware that factory farming was horrible and I tried to avoid factory farmed products whenever I could, but I wasn't aware of how awful the slaughterhouses are, just absolute heartbreaking, sickening. And I started to run across some videos exposing what was happening and also interviews with people who had worked there. And so originally I thought, okay, I'm going to make the decision to cut down on meat for my health. And then when I ran across all this other information, it was like overnight, okay, that's it. I am never eating meat again. I cannot contribute to that because I'm a huge animal lover. I have 3 cats and a dog, and I don't even kill bugs that come in my house. James, I think I've heard you say something similar. And so there's this huge hypocrisy with what's on my plate. And then it just so happens that around the same point in time, you start talking about the Essene Gospels of Peace and your diet change. And then you guys are bringing forth all this historical information about Jesus being a vegetarian. So for me, it was a done deal at that point. And so as far as how the transition affected me, within 2 weeks, 80% of my health issues were gone and my energy skyrocketed through the roof within 2 weeks.
Wow.
2 years in, I am healthier than I have ever been in my life. I have lost weight. I just could not have ever imagined being in this place. I couldn't used to exercise because I had so much fatigue. Now I can exercise multiple times a day if I want to and not feel tired. I need less sleep. I'm very rarely have a dip in energy. And so again, I want to thank you guys for your contribution to this because like I said in the beginning, it's not an exaggeration to say that your research and the work that you're doing has significantly impacted me in multiple ways, and this is just one example. I've also found the transition to be incredibly easy. Cooking plant-based food is so much easier, so much cheaper, less mess, tastes better. I haven't missed meat at all, if I'm being honest. I know that's not everybody's story, and I don't want to make it sound unrealistic, but that's just the truth. I have not missed it, and I have no desire to go back. And so I'm very happy to continue eating this way and feeling good about the ethical choice of not contributing to suffering in a way if I don't have to. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's so awesome. I mean, that touches our hearts because it's making a real world difference, not only in protecting the animals, but bringing you more health, more energy, more clarity, so you could be more productive and you can spread this word more effectively. And we're hearing these stories, Aaron, over and over and over again. And for you, people's lives are changing left and right. And it just feels so good. And we've got to give a shout out to our forerunner, our John the Baptist, Cam Waters, and the Christspiracy, because he's really paved the way for all of this. So got to give credit where credit's due. But we're so happy to hear that.
Yeah, I think also, Melissa, as we close, like in releasing the Jesus Diet, we're doing the Jesus Diet Challenge right now, which actually just wrapped up as the time of this recording, and the testimonials are coming in and just mind-blowing. But even throughout the challenge, we're seeing people commenting within 1 week, 2 weeks. And the most common one we see is, oh my gosh, I have so much energy. I feel amazing. I feel like I'm 20 years younger all of a sudden. To your point, I also, when I was a meat eater, I would notoriously, since my early 20s, have to take at least 1 nap a day, usually 2 and sometimes 3. I would just have all these dips in energy. And I couldn't figure out why until I started understanding the incredible energy expenditure that digesting flesh creates. And once I saw that, I'm like, oh, no wonder I'm so tired all of a sudden, or all the time, because this is costing my body all kinds of ATP to digest this super dense, animal flesh. And like you said, when the shift makes itself, like that phrase, when you change the way you look at something, the thing you're looking at changes. It's just like that, right? It's been, not only has it not been hard at all, I was suddenly revolted by meat looking at it. Even when I'm with friends that eat meat and we're like hanging out and eating together and they're having meat, I will get queasy sometimes looking at it because I'm like, that's a dead corpse over there on that plate.
Same.
And like, I was a corpse eater for, 30 some odd years, and it just kind of grosses me out. And that's it's a testament to how perception is everything. When you change your perception, your reality changes. And it also reminds me of like the Ebenezer Scrooge story analogy, where this guy's convinced everyone else is the problem. He's crabby, he's mean, he's angry. And he has to go through this ego death process through the 3 ghosts of Christmas past who show him the consequences of his actions, kind of like an NDE life review. And when he realizes, oh, I've been the problem, I'm the bad guy in this situation, I'm causing all these problems and the suffering, it changes everything. And now to the same people, he's bursting with love for them. And he wants to give little tiny Tim a gift for Christmas and a feast for the whole town. And he's going around giving out money and stuff. And he's skipping through the streets in joy. Like, that is how I felt when I gave up flesh. It's this alleviation of this burden you didn't know you were carrying, that our subconscious does know, our intuition, our spirit knows, I am contributing to suffering and death on earth, which is a clear violation of the golden rule. And so that's just what we want for everybody. But again, we know it cannot happen out of guilt or coercing or something. It has to be a legitimate shift in consciousness that takes place in your perception of the thing itself. So thank you for sharing that story, because I'm sure so many people have been inspired by what you just shared and can relate to it. But you thanked us for our work and our research, and I very much appreciate that. But I want to reflect that right back to you and say thank you, Melissa, for taking all these things we've shared and telling it to your audience, teaching these same things to the people that follow you, and sharing and spreading the good news, the gospel message of the golden rule. Like, this is the gospel of Jesus. We can all live by it. We can all embody it in the simplest ways. This is the message I think will change the world, when people realize the simple gospel teachings of Jesus are so near to us, so accessible to us. They're not far away. They're not in a religious institution. They're not even in your brain. They're in your heart. So I want to congratulate you for all the success you've had on your channel in spreading this message. And I want to encourage you, please keep it up, because we need as many people championing this message as possible. So as we close, I want to give you a chance to tell people where they can find your work and get involved with the content you produce and anything else you've got going on. And of course, we'll put all the links in the show notes below.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. As far as where people can find me, you can find me on YouTube at Love Covered Life Podcast. My website is lovecoveredlife.com. And the biggest thing I have going on that I'm very excited about is I did podcasting for a long time. I still love podcasting, but I've shifted more into focusing on teaching the Jesus way, because this is really where my passion has been.
Let's go.
And so, yes, in correlation with that, I have a membership called The Sanctuary, where we are living out the Jesus way together, the 5 pillars that I talked about. And I'm extremely excited about it, so passionate about sharing this message and bringing it into community. So, I mean, YouTube is great because we can give all the head knowledge and the information, but what we really want to do is make it real, bring it into community, and live it out. And so that's what the Sanctuary is all about. And I would love to have you join us.
Beautiful.
And that's really it for me as far as links.
Well, perfect. Well, we'll put all those links below, as I said, and please get involved with what Melissa's doing. And again, thank you, Melissa, for joining us today and just sharing all the wonderful things you shared with us today. And thank you guys for watching. And we hope you were deeply blessed and inspired and enriched by today's episode to do what we always do at the end of each podcast, is get out there in real life, in your world, and love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And we will see you, my friends, on the next episode of the Jesus Way podcast. Shalom.